This module is going to look at adaptation to thermal stress, focusing on ecogeographic distributions of body size and shape. Now, humans, like other mammals, are homeotherms. So they regulate body temperature via physiological means. So they maintain body temperatures within a thermal neutral zone. This is a range of temperatures ideal for metabolic chemical reactions to occur within the body. Homeothermy is energetically expensive when exposed to heat or cold stress. So the body works harder to maintain body temperatures in the thermal neutral zone via greater expenditure of metabolic energy to create or dissipate heat. The implication is that homeothermy in extreme environments, such as at the equator or near the poles, will exact strong selectional pressures that favor adaptations that reduce the impact of extreme environmental temperatures. So ecogeography is defined as the association between phenotype and geography. An example of this would be the adaptations to high altitude, looking at variation in elevation and how that affects a population. So we've already been doing some ecogeographic investigations from previous modules. So many ecogeographic studies rely exclusively on selection driven by environmental stressors. So a couple of notes to keep in mind. Other evolutionary forces are also impacting the geographic distributions of phenotypes. Furthermore, there will be exceptions to the geographic patterning, which will be outlined later. So we have what is known as the thermal regulatory imperative, and this is the most commonly used interpretation for understanding selective pressures on human populations in response to heat and cold stress. The model states that selection favors body size and shape that has optimized surface area to volume ratio for thermal regulation in a given thermal environment. So increased surface to volume ratio results in greater heat dissipation, and it is ideal for hot environments, whereas decreased surface to volume ratio results in greater heat retention, which is ideal for cold environments. Now we have two ecological rules that are related to surface to volume ratio. The first is Allen's rule, and this states that homeotherm limb size will decrease with a decrease in mean annual temperature. In other words, mammals living in colder climates will have shorter limbs, which will have that reduced surface to area ratio, while mammals living in hotter climates will have longer limbs, so increased surface to area ratio. Now the second rule is Bergmann's rule, and this states that homeotherm body size will vary within populations of the same species living in different thermal environments. Body size will increase with a decrease in mean annual temperature. So in other words, populations living in colder climates will have greater mass, so again, reduced surface to volume ratio, than populations living in hotter climates, which will have increased surface to volume ratio. So the expectations for human populations then is that populations living near the poles are expected to be shorter and stockier, having that reduced surface area to volume ratio. Populations living near the equator are expected to be taller and lankier with an increased surface volume ratio. And populations living in temperate zones are expected to be somewhere between the two extremes. So we have some classic studies on Inuit populations from the Kodiak Island region. So these are one of the best studied cold adapted populations, and they're most well known for their extensive large sea mammal hunting subsistence strategies. And this strategy creates a diet that has extremely high protein and fat content, which provides the energy for the high metabolic costs of maintaining body temperatures in the thermal neutral zone. So morphologically, the Inuit exhibit shorter limbs, broader trunks, and heavier weight than populations at mid-latitudes, and they have that reduced surface area to volume ratio. Now looking at the Point Hope archaeological cultural groups, these are located north of Kodiak Island in an even more extreme cold thermal environment. We have the Tigara period from 1200 CE through 1600 CE, which is culturally comparable to the Kodiak Island Kunyak Inuit, and there's a strong emphasis on the large sea mammal hunting. We also have the Ipituk period, 100 BCE to 500 CE, and these are not necessarily direct ancestors to the Tigara occupation, as there's a greater emphasis on caribou hunting. The implication is that there was less energy available for thermal regulation, which implies that selective pressures on cold adaptive body size may be greater in this population. So the Holliday and Hilton study of 2010 compared the Point Hope archaeology populations to the Konye Inuit and to external geographic populations being European, North African, and Sub-Saharan African populations. The expectation is that the Inuit populations as a whole would reflect the body proportions predicted of the Bregman rule and Allen's rule when compared to mid-latitude European and North African populations and equatorial Sub-Saharan African populations. It was also expected that the Point Hope population would exhibit the most extreme body proportions out of the Inuit, given their environment is even more extreme than Kodiak Island. So the conclusions of this study were that body shape and proportion differed between Inuit and Sub-Saharan African populations, as predicted by the Bregman rule and Allen's rule. However, European samples were not differentiated from Inuit samples. This indicates that Europeans have a long evolutionary history with adaptation to cold environments, and it may reflect gene flow between Neanderthals and other early Homo sapiens populations. Neanderthals are often considered the cold-adapted human population, as they exhibit some of the most extreme short and stocky builds. Now, within the Inuit samples, there was little significant differences at most points of measure. The few differences indicate that the Ipaku may have the greater cold-adapted body proportions. The differences may be the result of cultural buffering to environmental stress in the Kunye and Tigara populations, for the emphasis on sea mammal hunting provides greater energy available for metabolic heat production, which may reduce the selective pressure for cold-adapted body proportions.